Make sure it's on.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome back an old friend of the Armenian Studies Program of Fresno State, Dr. Ümit Kurt. Many of you know him. He has been here many times before, both to teach and to lecture. And I know he has many friends in the community, and it was great seeing him again today. Before I introduce formally Dr. Kurt, I'd just like to remind everybody that on November 12th, 19th, next week, November 19th, we'll be having our final lecture of the semester, which will be a recap of our trip to Armenia this summer. Will be Professor Barlo Dermagaduchian and myself will be presenting on our tour with students primarily. We went to Armenia this summer for 2 weeks. It was a fantastic trip. The students were excellent. One of them is standing right there. And I know they had a fantastic time, so we're looking forward to that as well. This evening, Dr. Kurt will be speaking on the Young Turks, racism and the construction of national identity. And we're really pleased to say that the talk is co-sponsored by the Armenian Studies Program and the Center for Ethics, Character, and Civic Education at Fresno State. And I would just like to remind everyone there is a sign-up sheet outside to be put on the mailing list for the Armenian Studies Program as well. And while there is an extensive body of literature addressing the foundations of Turkish nationalism and its racist aspects in the early Republican era in contemporary Turkey, a significant gap persists in the critical period between 1911 and 1916. Is the period right before and at the onset of the genocide, when the very existence of the Ottoman Empire was at stake. This talk sets as its goal displaying the racist streak apparent in the construction of Turkish nationalism at this period. It offers an analysis of the fabric of Turkish nationalism and the racist patterns of this fabric through an examination of essays published in the first 9 volumes of the Journal of Türk Yurdu, Turkish Homeland, the most eminent of the Turkish journals of the time, and the intellectual organ of the CUP, Committee for Union Progress. It aims to track down the premises and the origins of the historical evolution and the development of Turkish nationalism by analyzing the content of the journal's writings. Critical scholars of nationalism have argued that race and racism are indispensable elements in many forms of nationalism. And so Dr. Kurt will explain today how, as Turkish nationalism developed, it played a central role also in the construction of a Turkish national identity that obviously contributed to the genocide. Dr. Ümit Kurt, whom we know well, received his PhD from the Department of History at Clark University in 2016 and is currently a Polanski Fellow at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. He is the author of several monographs and numerous scholarly articles, and I would just like to say that his book, Eintep, 1915, Genocide and Perpetrators, will be coming out in English with Paul Grave shortly, so you should look forward to that. But you can buy it in Turkish as well, if you'd like to have it. You can read Turkish. As well as he's also, just between us, he's also signed a contract for Harvard University Press to publish his dissertation. So we're really pleased, and we look forward to seeing that. And of course, we'll bring him back here when that comes out to give a lecture on that. So without further ado, I introduce Dr. Kurt.
Hello, everyone. So everybody hears me? Thank you so much for such a generous introduction. I'm so happy to be here and see familiar faces. I must confess, it's a confession actually. So as a teenager, or when I start just realizing my own consciousness awakening, I just realized I didn't have any kind of belonging to anywhere except for Eintep, where I was born and raised. But until coming and living here. So Fresno actually is a second Ainta for me, like a second home for me. So I really feel the affinity and the kind of belonging to this place, thanks to Professor Barro, Ermagadican, and Sergio, and their hospitality and the people community here. So thank you so much, and I always appreciate your precious and invaluable help and support of my work. So, as Sergio has beautifully pointed out, today my talk will be about actually Turkish nationalism, early modern Turkish nationalism within a certain time period between 1911 and 1916. So it was on purpose to identify this time period in order to understand defining parameters of Turkish nationalism with particular focus on its racist aspects, which have had an impact on the ideological preparation, ideological, incitement, foment of Armenian genocide, or not only the Armenian genocide, also collective violence inflicted upon other Christian minorities in the Ottoman Empire during the Great War. So, let me give you a brief history of early modern Turkish nationalism. So, like many other nationalist movements, Turkish nationalism began as a result of the research in cultural fields such as history and language. The first sparks of Pan-Turkism, an active branch of Turkish nationalism, can be detected in the works of two major writers, Shinasi and Ziya Pasha. So these were Ottoman intellectuals during the Tanzimat period, actually. So cultural nationalism in the Tanzimat, which means reform era, was marked by an effort to create a simplified and purified national language. So the first attempt in formation and construction of Turkish nationalism was a simplification and purification of Turkish language. How? By getting rid of Persian and Arabic words from the language. This meant, eliminating the differences between the formal written and informal spoken language. It was Ahmet Vefik Pasha who gave a discourse, who gave a scientific character, the simplification, and back to the language common to all Turks people movement led by Shinasi and Ziya Pasha again. Ahmet Vefik, who regarded the Ottoman language as a dialect of Turkish extending over Europe and all of Asia in his Lehçe-i Osmaniye, had anticipated and advocated a great Turkish unity. Yusuf Akçuraoğlu considered Ahmet Vefik Pasha as an exponent of Pan-Turkism with a heightened consciousness in the field of language. Emerging primarily in the fields of language and literature, Pan-Turkism, popular among the Ottoman Turks, soon influenced in the fields of philology, ethnology, history, and foreign relations within the empire. In the field of ethnology, Mustafa Celaleddin Pasha's work, Le Turc Ancien et Moderne, The Ancient and Modern Turks, published in 1869, deserves special attention. In this work, also meticulously examined by Yusuf Akçuraoğlu, Yusuf Akçuraoğlu was one of the founding fathers of the early modern Turkish nationalism along with Ziya Gökalp, and I will be talking about Yusuf Akçuraoğlu's writings and essays in this Turkish Homeland Journal soon. So, the author attempted to prove that Turks belong to the same race as the Europeans. He called this race Turko-Aryan. His goal was to alleviate the hostility of European people and the states towards Turks by demonstrating that they share a common origin. Attempting to show how great the Turkish race was and how skilled in laying the foundation of civilizations, this work, according to Akçuraoğlu, was the earliest that incorporated European sources on Turkish identity, Pan-Turkism, and adopted European research methods among the works of the Ottoman Turks. Mustafa Celaleddin's work discussed the mass and strength of the Turkish race, the role it played in the history of humanity, the affluence of Turkish language, and its importance in the formation of other languages, the relationships among the Turkish communities expanded across the large territories of Asia and Europe, the drawbacks of disregarding Pan-Turkism in the Ottoman culture and politics, the necessity of uniting the non-Muslims, Ottoman subjects, through racial and linguistic ties in an unprecedented manner. The author further claimed that Western civilization was founded by Turkish people, who in fact descended from the Turco-Aryan race. Yet it's ironic that Mustafa Celalettin's book, in which he laid out an ethnic map of Turkish race, let's say, and attributed it eternal superiority over other races, is in French rather than Turkish. So Turkology in Europe was another factor that underlay the emergence of Pan-Turkism in Ottoman Turkey. The works of European Orientalists who had studied pre-Islamic Turkish history, utilizing Chinese and Islamo-Arabic sources since the 19th century, deeply influenced Ottoman intellectuals. Along with the works of Joseph de Guignes, Arthur Lumley-Davids, and Leon Cahun, and the Hungarian Orientalist Vambery, who first used the word Turan to refer to an ethnic category, an interaction between the Turkish intellectuals play an important role in the rise of Pan-Turkism. Initially gaining popularity in language and literature, Pan-Turkism became dominant primarily in historical studies and in other fields of the humanities. European Orientalist studies on the history of Turks before the Ottoman period, which investigated the magnitude of their civilization and affluence of their language, had a considerable impact on Turkish intellectuals. Studies of Turkology and cultural Pan-Turkism underlay the ideological context of Pan-Turkism. Although the foundations of Turkish nationalism had been laid by studies in the areas of language, history, and literature, the idea of Turkish nation had become as important as religion before the Second Constitutional Era. Second Constitutional Era referred to 1908 period, right after the Young Turk Revolution in July of the same year. And Pan-Turkism had itself yet not become an ideology. There was neither press nor any kind of society that promoted the nationalist ideology. So the goal of the Young Turks during the Revolution of July 1908 was to eliminate separatist tendencies and to save the empire from the disintegration by uniting all the diverse elements under the general identity of Ottomanism. This would also prevent European states from interfering in Ottoman domestic affairs by using minority rights as an excuse in their eyes. Religious communities were regarded as millet, people or nations, in the Ottoman Empire, and this was the idea that formed the basis of Ottomanism, defended by the members of the Union and Progress Party. So Union and Progress Party, the CUP, was the government and was the political figures who carried out the revolution in July 1908. In Ottomanism, common roots such as race, language, traditions, or history did not stand out. Instead, the political loyalty of the different elements that made up the imperial subjects was foregrounded. Despite the politics of identity promoted during the Second Constitutional period, nationalist movements and desire for national independence were mounting among all imperial subjects except the Turks. Some members of the different nations that benefited from the relative freedom brought about by the revolution demanded realization of the promises made in the constitution and desired independence. So the Ottoman Greeks were the first and foremost community who asked for it. Along with certain Christians, Armenians and Bulgarians engage in activities conducive to independence. Some Muslim elements, as in the case of people in Albania and Yemen, also attempt to sever the ties with the empire and could no longer be suppressed. Turks who regarded themselves as a dominant and ruling element of the empire felt threatened and left behind in the nationalism race. Political Turkism, advocated by the Turkish intellectuals, paved the way for Turkish nationalism to become a systematic ideology. The Pan-Turkist cause was completely formed in the minds and ideals of the Russian emigres after the 1900 revolution. In parallel with the developments that took place during the Second Constitutional Era, exponents of Turkism, gathering around various associations and press, laid emphasis on the urgent need of uniting those Turks who lacked nationalist consciousness and ideals. Coupled with the loss of territories in the Balkans between the years 1912 and 13, the prospect of Arab nationalists becoming even more active further disconcerted Turkish intellectuals and resulted in the inauguration and expansion of Turkish nationalist fervor. Within this historical context, the pioneering attempt to promote Turkish nationalism in the Ottoman Empire was the founding of the Turkish Homeland Society on August 31st, 1911 by Mehmet Emin Yurdakul. The society was founded by the prominent intellectuals of the pan-Turkish movement, such as Ahmet Agayev, Akil Muhtar Özcan, Yusuf Akçuraoğlu. Encouraged by Mehmet Emin Yurdakul, they decided to publish a journal called Turkish Homeland. Türk Yurdu. It was the very first issue of Türk Yurdu in 1912, sorry. The publication was printed by Turkish Center, founded January 25, 1912. The Turkish Homeland aimed at defending the rights of the Turkish people within the empire. It was in their official discourse. Expanding Turkish nationalism, delivering all the news, negative and positive, from every corner of Turkish world, and foregrounding the Turkish interest. So it was one of the coverage of Turkish Homeland after the establishment of Turkish Republic. By the way, the journal is still on the ground, so it's still being published. Yeah. The program, including 7 articles, was announced in 1911 and formed by the goals that address the Turkish world and pan-Turkism. So, the definition of nation exposed by the contributor of the journal assumes an enduring community that has lived through ages. The idea of continuity is the result of a search for roots. Taking the remote past of the Turkish society as its reference, it reconstructs Turkish history with a supra-historical attitude. Culture, shared social sentiments, and even language are regarded as the products of historicity. As in all nationalist attempts of construction, history is reimagined, is based on a criticism of the existing Ottoman historiography and substituting it with a more nationalist framework. It's not a coincidence that the studies of Genghis Khan, disliked by Ottoman historians for instance, take up considerable space in Turkish homeland. Yusuf Akçuraoğlu, as one of those pan-Turkish intellectuals of Russian origin, criticized the Ottoman historiography. So he was one of the leading figures along with his friends Ahmet Agayev. So they were born and raised in Kazan in Russia, in the Tsarist Russia, and then they were educated extensively, and they were coming from bourgeois kind of families in the Tsarist Russia, and they were exposed to Slavization, and that's why they decided to emigrate to Ottoman Empire and started this nationalist movement. Instrumentalizing history to construct an identity for the newly founded nation provided lent Akçuraoğlu a reductionist attitude which often underlies nationalist historiography. He may have been convinced that the official ideology of Ottomanism, which held the empire together for so long, has petered out. He expressed his belief regarding the impossibility of preventing those nations within the empire from achieving their national goals in his article entitled 3 Types of Politics, published in the newspaper Turk, a publication based in Cairo, in 1904. In this article, he pointed out the impossibility of not only the unity of the elements, impossibility of the Ottomanism within the empire, but also the historical invalidity of pan-Islamic project that aimed to unite all Muslims politically under the roof of the empire. He regarded the Turkish nationalist politics based on the idea of race, ırk in Turkish, namely pan-Turkism, as the one that must be adopted by the virtue of being the best adjusted to historical conditions. Thus, Akçuraoğlu can be seen as the first Turkish intellectual to advocate pan-Turkism in politics. So pan-Turkish intellectuals, led by him, and writers who contributed to this journal, Turkish Homeland, between 1911 and 1916, endeavored considerably to reinforce the concept of tribal types, nation, and race. So they were basically searching for roots of Turks, being a Turk. How can we go far back, like going far back to Genghis Khan period even. The essential role attributed to the national ideal taking shape around these concepts was one of the headings in their agenda. So it must be emphasized at the outset that the authors of Turkish Homeland used the concept of tribes, nation, and race interchangeably, without considering their differences. We cannot therefore talk about an objective and nuanced definition of nations, tribe, and race. The fact that the word nation referred to the Turkish nation helped it become fully adapted to the meaning of nation in Western languages. Ahmet Ağaoğlu, another leading figure in the journal, from Tsarist Russia, again, another Russian emigrant, claimed that the nation and the race, which he analyzed in his article entitled National Movement in the journal, were different from each other. For him, although there was a Turkish race, a Turkish nation had not yet been formed. He maintained that the concept of race was not compatible with that of nation because, for example, communities of the same race can exist as different nations. He also pointed out that some sought nation not in race but in religion, yet religion did not function sufficiently as an underpinning principle of a nation, as in the case of those with the same faith existing in different nations. Although it's a stronger aspect than race and faith, he similarly crossed out language as an underlying principle of nation, since communities sharing a common language may live as separate national identities. Defining Turks as a tribe, Ağaoğlu, or Agayev, determined its boundaries as those geographies that show Turkish aspects. The boundaries of the Turkish world are so vast that all time and again Turks expanded across the four quarters of the world: east, west, north, and south, like floods flowing from the Altai mountains, which rise in the heart of Asia, in his writing, and the most remote parts of China to Finland, Poland, Hungary, and North Africa. So the Turks stretch all the way leading up to North Africa. Here we come across an imaginative construct embedded in a space as vast as ambiguous as a dream. The dream of the Turkish world arises from the need to characterize Turkish people as authentic and noble, and tracing the national ideal in such origins. Fixing and essentializing Turkishness in an infinitive continuum constitutes the basis of the national identity. In this vast and ambiguous space, the tribal essence and the identity of Turkishness have been lost due to the double facts of Turkish intermingling with other races and coming under the influence of other civilizations. The question Agayev asked, who knows what portion of the blood running in the veins of Indians, Afghans, Persians, Russians, Poles, Tunisians, Algerians, Egyptians is Turkish, is remarkable in its implication of race in relation to the concept of the Turk. His idea of Turkish race, with its psychological, biological, and cultural implications, gave national identity a sacred character, turning it into a worldly religion. He further claimed that humanity and the worn-out traits of civilization will be reanimated by the infusion of Turkish blood, which in fact is God's will. It can be safely said that he uses the concept of race and nation interchangeably. The British and German, having adopted the principle of their civilization from Romans, do not call Romans brother, he said. They do not have a right to do, since they are not blood brothers. As you see, what matter is blood, nation, and race. His definition based on race, ethnicity, and blood ties is not always consistent and pervasive. Rather, his attitude can be regarded as cultural essentialism. At the same time, according to Akçuraoğlu, there are two different views pertaining to the idea of the nation. The French view, according to which the birth of a nation depends on people's desire, and German view of nation, in which it's a natural outcome of rational unity. The nation, therefore, is a necessity rather than a matter of desire. He adopted the German notion, namely that, quote, becoming a member of a nation is a result of a blood and descent, not of individual will and desire. The most revered idea of nation that had changed European history and geography in the 19th century was the one related to idea of race, unquote. In a similar manner to Agayev, Akçuraoğlu employed the concept of race underlining the historical constitution of nationalism in the sense of being connected with the blood ties, which suggests biological racism. The latter also used race and nation interchangeably, just like the former. Quote, I am not one of those who want to believe that the historical term of the Turkish race is over. A race with a long course of life before it, along with all kinds of genuine genes, will also bring up its literary genes, unquote. He maintained that nationalist movements in Europe have developed along the axis of race. In his article Turkishness, he described how the Turkish national ideal has emerged historically. He further argued that 45 to 50 million in his estimation are composed of 5 different groups, such as Azerbaijani, Turks, Crimean Turks, Northern Turks, and Eastern Turks, like Kazakhstan, Central Turkestan, and Eastern Turkestan. The fact that they have not the extended geography they occupy and their huge population caused them to lose their dominance as a nation. Cause, Turks lost their political dominance, while the entire East was subjugated by Turks a few centuries ago. What is left in the 20th century is a semi-independent Ottoman Turkish Khaganate, unquote. In Akçuroğlu, the unity of language is an essential characteristic of the Turkish race. Talking about the contribution of the Turkish race to the progress of civilization, he held that the civilizations into which Turkish race has been integrated have rarely been backwards. Similarly, Islamic civilization owes its progress to Turks. Akçuroğlu mentioned about the large geography of Turks who regarded as the great Turan race, extending over Turkish India, Chinese Turkestan, and Iran. He believed that Turkish race was the ruler of Asia on the grounds of its genes in governing and ruling over people. His racist nationalism, attributing an ontological and transcendent value to Turkishness, is reinforced with the following assertion, quote, our ideas are fixed. If Ottoman Turks' dexterity for dominance and governance has not completely run its course yet, then yet they will never give up their national habit, unquote. So, I would like to talk about one particular article which was written against Turkish Homeland, and the Turkish Homeland Journal, actually editorial board, wrote a response. So, this response of Turkish Homeland to an article published in a British journal. The Greek version of it was republished in a daily newspaper located in Istanbul. It enables us to understand racist inclination of these writers. Turkish Homeland denounced the degrading statements about Turkishness that appeared in this article. The denunciation addressed the West. The journal defended the Turkish identity against the West and furthermore wished to prove the superiority of Turkish people to Westerners. The article that engendered response in Turkish Homeland included statements that degraded the Turkish nation and showed nothing but the fact that the author, the publisher, the audience lacked morality and decency, according to Turkish Homeland authors. So the Turkish Homeland condemned statements such as Turkish nation is faced with corruption, the number of Turkish people living in the Ottoman lands is less than the other ethnic groups, and attempt to show Turkish superiority to the other races and Turkish dominance over them. It further claimed that the Turkish nation was robust and clean. According to Turkish Homeland, Turks were superior to Westerners and cleaner. These allegations are unfounded. The Turkish nation suffers less from disease, such as tuberculosis and syphilis, than Westerners. The fact that moral and social diseases pestering the West hardly trouble Turkish society proves that the allegations against Turks are nothing but all slanders and lies. That was a response from the journal. In the disclaimer, the journal also emphasized that the idea that Turkish race was historically much more advanced than the West. Quote, had not the Turk, the sovereign master of the East, been also the defender of the Eastern independence, the representative of the Eastern thought and size forever 9 centuries, unquote. So the approaches which reduce racism to a physicobiological, or a blood-bound system of thought and sever it from cultural nationalism in Turkey, disregard the following. The nuances about the definition and content of racism are not really deemed important by Turkish homeland writers, who represent the founding generation of Turkish nationalism. The problem here is the attitude that is traveled by such nuances for their own sake and which endeavors to free them from racism. Not to be forgotten, racism is not just limited to definition based on an anthropological explanation and blood ties. The essentialist and ethnicist factors employed in defining Turkishness can also be evaluated as a category of cultural racism. So, the defeat in the Balkan Wars in 1912 and 1913 also helped to contribute to the molding of the myth of national survival out of resentment and the culture of despair in the late Ottoman Empire. The loss of Edirne, the second capital of the Ottoman Empire, along with the last remaining territories in the Balkan, was a source of acute humiliation for many ordinary Ottoman subjects. At this juncture, for the authors of Turkish homeland, the only remaining option was to establish a cult of racial nationalism and Islam in the re-Christian Turkish homeland, Anatolia. The losses, sufferings, and disaster in the Balkans was a rallying point for the resurrection of future nation. In line with that purpose, Akçıoğlu tried to boost the confidence of Turks faced with such a dire situation. So the Balkan Wars basically it took place in 1912 and 1913, and within a month, the Ottoman Empire lost 85% of its southern European land in this war. And the hundreds of thousands of Muslims from this Balkan region, from Greece, and Thessaloniki especially, they lost their homes, and then they were also massacred. They were exposed to massacres as well, and they ended up in Anatolia as a last harbor to survive. No matter what happens, Turks would stay alive and would not be defeated, according to Akçıoğlu. The pages of history were replete with the examples of invincibility of the Turks. He sought for the Turks to keep their grudges and resentment alive instead of wallowing in despair. He sought to create an invincible and immortal Turkish images, which he made transcended by raising it above everything that is worldly and fixing it within an eternal continuum. Quote, "Cry and lament, my comrades. We lost our Edirne. Cry and do not laugh until Turkish race laughs. Yet do not be sore or do not give up. You lost a step. Fight for taking back your country and make new worlds." His verse reminds me of the Trump's word, "Make the America great again." Nourish your anger. Do not lose hope. Napoleon, who wanted to try the Turks a century ago, said, "You can kill Turks, but never defeat them." When his sword was broken by Turkish strength, it has been 100 years now, yet Turks have been defeated. Today, however, I say, the Turk has been defeated, yet cannot be killed. Turks will live not like the worlds, but like the spirits. Unquote. So Köprülüzade Fuat also used similar agitated language when writing about the Muslims in Rumelia, in Macedonia, in the Balkans, who were destroyed by those he termed barbaric Slavs, and describing the helplessness and despair of the Ottoman Turks. In his article entitled "Hope and Persistence," in which he referred to Bulgarians, Greeks, and Serbians as barbaric Slavs, he stated that those barbaric people wanted to drive the Muslims out of Macedonia. Quote, "While the barbaric armies who push us the gate of the Sultanate in order for driving us out of our last standing cities are waiting near Çatalca, I want to tell the Turkish youth about hope and persistence." And he continued, "Despair everywhere. Those who are ignorant, who are freedom lovers, and enlightened, everybody feels physical and spiritual weakness and languor. This is the current state of mind of the Ottoman Turks for you." He believed that the West, as the major perpetrator of the disaster of the Balkan War, spilled blood, oppressed people, and aimed to destroy the Turks. The writer felt abased in the face of such misery and humiliation of the Turks, once the dominant nation. Quote, "Your race, your honorable and dear race, is totally degraded. I am a Turk, the son of a race whose essence is honorable and great." Unquote. And he ended with the following sentence. Will the spring come over the great and miserable and unlucky Turkish race and over the Altai mountains again? The hatred of treacherous enemy, combined with the anxiety of the imperial subjects, is easily glimpsed from his writing. Quote, those foreigners who want to understand the sorrow of the immigrant groups made up of starving, moribund children, barely dressed, sick old women and weak, disease-ridden men in our hearts can look into wild, revengeful depths of our rise. They will not only see the mourning for Edirne there, but also a longing for Danube, the Bulgarian shore. While expressing the sentiments of national pride and superiority and uplifting the national history, in his poem Young Turk, Mehmet Evin, another Turkish homeland author, also searched for an ethnic authenticity based on Turkish blood. He quote, the Turkish state will not die. No, I am a noble Turk. I descend from the lineage, the blood of which makes the essence of history. I know how to die as well as how to kill. If the raised hand of the enemy threatening the Turks were mine, I would lower it. Unquote. So, another interesting figure, Ömer Seyfettin. So he wrote an article, he wrote an essay in Turkish homeland, right immediately after of the Balkan War, and the title of his essay was A National History, the Bastard. It has an exemplary status in Turkish nationalism in displaying the hatred of the West and animosity against foreigners with a grotesque manner. The story took place in Egypt in his essay. At the outset, foreign institutions were described with a language full of hatred. The Turkish self was enslaved by foreigners in Egypt and was likened to a weak and despondent sick man. Foreigners who enjoyed themselves sat on the deathbed of the sick man, washed with gushing blood and not yet dried. Quote, these foreign institutions are nightmarish to me. It annoys me to think that everything in the horizon is foreign and belongs to foreigners. The noble Arab, who is the strong and sacred wing of Turkism, wants to fly high, is nothing but a slave there in his own country. Unquote. For him, the Turk has become an outcast in his own country. The Europeans, depicted as foreigners by Ömer Seyfettin, were responsible for that. He further depicted the Europeans, whose imperialist politics was proof of their monstrosity, as greedy, bloodsucker, malicious, miserly, and arch-enemy of the Turks. With the withdrawal of Turks, Europeans swarmed there like vile and poisonous locusts and captured all the blood veins of this poor Islamic country. They kept sucking the blood of our brothers in a religion with an insatiable, frantic thirst and a mad greed. Unquote. These foreigners, for him, violated and contaminated the Turkish and Muslim territories. In the following description, Seyfettin's hatred took a hygienic visage. Quote, women, men, children, natives, and foreigners were all mixed and flowing slowly, laughing and playing. A foul smell of prostitution and debauchery came from them in strong waves. Unquote. For him, when the West captured Sudan, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia and Tripoli, it oppressed the Arabs along with the Turks. Turks and Muslims are reduced to the status of a dependent minority in their own country. Unquote. Quote, suffering from insomnia at night, I would go to the balcony in a miserable state and stare at the crowd, flowing with the noise of a dumb river. The majority of them comprise of the hat wearers and foreigners. He accused the Turks and Arabs who did not react to this situation and claim their rights and who were in the grip of sluggishness and apathy of villainy. Living in Egypt was no different from living in the dungeon of resignation for him. In this story, our writer went to a foreign restaurant in Egypt, suffering from such conditions. He came across his old school friend Ahmet Nihat. Yet Ahmet Nihat was not the good old Ahmet Nihat anymore. He had forgotten his country, lost his spirit of Turkishness, and become a European. So here is his description of Ahmet Nihat. I instantly recognized his eyes, foreign and Eastern under the hat. This was my friend from school. He asked him, Seyfettin, what he is doing here, whether he is on a trip. Seyfettin answers, I said no, I was just passing by. Where? To Benghazi. Oh my, heroism then. But you are going there in vain, it's already been burnt to ground. Seyfettin answers, those Turks who wear hats think so. Unquote. The image of a hat-wearing Turk represents a person who is self-alienated and Europeanized. Ahmet Nihat is such an example of complete alienation, Europeanization and degeneration. Quote, Ahmet Nihat, I know, might be a Catholic. There are no few of those who can change their creed as they change dresses and sell their soul as if it's a piece of junk. Yet Ahmet Nihat, who was born in Istanbul, whose parents are Turkish, who speaks Turkish, and has Turkish blood running in his veins, cannot change his nationality. He cannot become French. This would be self-deception. Unquote. Seyfettin clearly defined national identity in relation with the blood running in the veins. The fact that Ahmet Nihat refused Turkishness and claimed to be European aroused anger in Seyfettin because blood must tie Ahmet Nihat to Turkishness. Going contrary to unchanging essence of his ethno-identity, Ahmet Nihat became an object of hatred in the eyes of Seyfettin. Quote, this wretch refusing his nationality was like a dead shark washed up on the beach, lying there smashed. I sensed something rotten and felt disgust. Unquote. Seyfettin firmly believed the West completely degraded and humiliated Turks. He reflected what the West thought about Turks in Ahmet Nihat's statements. I was disgusted by Turkishness and anything like that. Ahmet Nihat now speaks. My father, in his big body, broad shoulders, strong arms, chubby face, and thick lips, looked exactly like a dumb Turkish wrestler. All his movements were vulgar, coarse and base. My mother, a delicate and gentle Circassian, hated him. Istanbul was a dungeon to me. Unless I had Levantine friends, I would go crazy. I dreamed about the European cities at night, and I will sing operas and national pieces as loudly as I can and dance after shutting myself in my room. Unquote. Understanding Westernness only superficially and wanting to imitate it just as facade was a frequent accusation directed at self-alienated admirers of the West. Ömer Seyfettin depicted Ahmet Nihat as a caricature whose self is engrossed by a superficial understanding of the West. The fact that he wanted to forget his Turkishness and made others forget it as well is the natural outcome of such pathology, he defined. Quote, to think that I was a Turk inspired in me a wish to kill myself. Unquote. In Seyfettin's imagination, Europeanness meant caring only for one's self-interest, being an interest-oriented materialist. Materialism separated the West from all kinds of moral values. Ahmet Nihat was an example of this. He had lost his mother, yet he only cared for her inheritance. Quote, your mother is dying, Ahmet. She has a will for you. Unless you come, you will be bereft of her inheritance. I will not care, yet the inheritance issue turned my stomach. They had found my weakest point. I have always known my interests and put them above everything ever since I was a child. I jump on the train without even taking my luggage. I would wear that disgusting liver-colored fez again, the Ottoman traditional hat. And I will look like a dumb Turk, an unfeeling bottle of champagne with a red top. Unquote. While his mother was on her deathbed, Ahmet Nihat found out that the person who he has known as father was not his real father. His father was a Frenchman. After marrying the Turk, who he has known as father, his mother had an affair with a Frenchman, and Ahmet Nihat was the result. It was all his imagination of Ömer Seyfettin. That wasn't real, actually. It was his imagination. When Ahmet Nihat found out about this, he felt a deep purification. He felt that his soul was being cleaned. He went to Paris to track down his real father and change his name to Pierre de Bois. After he told this story to Seyfettin, he tried to convince him that he was not Turkish but French. Quote, do you now understand that I am a real Frenchman? Seyfettin's answer is chilling. Yes, I do. You are not indeed Turkish. You are a bastard. The image of the West appeared as the unhappy woman who cheats on her husband. Seyfettin finished his story summarizing his perception of the West, and European means imitation, and superficially it has no soul, essence, or self. Quote, I recall those dandies with long fingernails, dressed up in the latest fashions, and wearing monocles, who deny their Turkishness, who hate and degrade Turks, and try to become Europeanized. And I ask whether all of these are bastards, and whether all their mothers have been impregnant in Beyoğlu. I see big, black, bloody crosses. Unquote. So, uncovering a racist vein in Turkish nationalism and answering the question of to what extent it nourishes subsequent forms of Turkish nationalism is possible by reading the essays written by these Turkish homeland authors who regularly wrote for this journal, particularly between 1911 and 1916. Regardless of what our definition of racism, the racist elements in the Turkish nationalist ideology of the period are excessive. One of the prominent issues emerging here is the fact that the concept of race, tribe, and ethnicity, gender, lineage, and nation are used interchangeably. The writers give these concepts a racist edge that emphasize immutable blood ties, and such racist discourse is embedded in cultural nationalism. Turkishness defined in an essential manner. Arguments about the lack of racist tendencies among those authors writing for Turkish homeland therefore seem baseless and must be reconsidered. It's hard to clarify whether Turkish homeland writers regarded Turkishness as ethnicity, as nationality, or as a definition of a race founded on a biological or physiological basis qualified with the idea of blood ties. For example, in the article Akçuraoğlu used the term Turkish race and defined Turks as the dominant element in Asia. He viewed the study of the Turkish race as the study of the ancient Turkish history. Even if we define race as a category, referring to the sum of biological and physical qualities, explaining through anthropological terms, which differentiate a group of people from the rest, we can find traces of racist discourse in Turkish nationalism. But we cannot claim that it's the predominant discourse. The above-mentioned definition, nevertheless, offers a limited perspective of racism. It must not therefore be disregarded that a racist vein, latent under the surface of cultural nationalism, or sometimes visible, has played a role in the construction of Turkish nationalism. So, in a nutshell, the content of Turkish homeland articles analyzed here help us recall an indispensable point. The Turk cannot be defined as a natural element. She becomes Turkish as long as she perceives and defines herself as Turkish. The nation state is responsible for teaching those pure Turks how to be Turkish, and to do this, it has to redesign the content of Turkishness. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, Umit. Thank you for that insightful exploration of these specific articles between 1911 and 1916 in this journal that obviously had wider repercussions within the formation of Turkish nationalism. We do have time for questions. If people have any questions for Dr. Kurt? Right?
Just a short comment. All those troubles the Turks had with defining racism was also common in American racism, and I guess other types of racism too. It started with, how do you, there was a slippery slope or undefined line between biology and culture. It seems like a common problem of racist ideology.
It's a very good point, yeah.
someone's mind.
Yeah, it's a good point. Now the critical scholars of nationalism actually has been working on this aspect of nationalism by terming by finding a racist aspect, not only focusing on the physiological, biological anthropologism, because it all goes back to Nazi period, the Third Reich. The idea emanates from there, but they now come up with the idea of cultural nationalism. So you ascribe certain features of a nation to a certain group of people. So Turks can only be beautiful. Turks can only be courageous. Turks can only be both. By essentializing these elements, fixing them in a certain period, and then to ascribe those qualities only to certain group of people, you name it, nation, race, ethnicity, lineage, whatever. So actually, this kind of flexibility enables you to define race and racism in a very, very, broad manner as well.
It's rather confusing on some level. It sounds like there's a delusional disorder going on. Is there a mental health problem going on with these people as they make their constructs and narratives that just everything's perfect, we have no shame, we don't do anything wrong, we're beautiful, everything's great about our people, and it just seems no people group is perfect, or that's just to be so delusional. But it seems to be prevalent even up through today.
Are they taken seriously, really?
So actually, they were not delusional. They were doing what they were writing on purpose because of the following fact. They went through a great defeat. In 1912 and 13, the Balkans went away. In Albania, Albanians were asking for independence. In Yemen, Arabs were, revolting. And also for Armenian, national parties and political organizations were also asking for reform and everything. So the Serbians, Bulgarians, all Ottoman Christians who were the subjects of this dominant nation, the Turk. Now they were defeated big time, lost the whole European land, and they were in destitute, and they ended up in Anatolia. You need to rescue these people. You need to make them alive again. You need to foment them. You need to encourage them to feel like that. So that's why actually they created those delusional things just to make them recall that how big the Turkishness, and so that's why it was quite instrumental. They had a political agenda, and by the way, the Ottoman ruling government at that time, the Union and Progress Party, they financially funded and supported this journal, this magazine, and numerous authors and contributors of this magazine were members of the Union and Progress Party as well. So it was after the Balkan War, the journal declared itself as an official journal of the Union and Progress Party as well. So which means it also indicates that Turkish nationalism became, for the first time, official ideology of the state.
Yeah, I get that. And you see my point. I mean, they're using this fixed false belief to rally them, unify whoever they can, and out of that delusion,
Exactly.
they're going to do evil and justify it.
Exactly. That's right.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, did it start off with the intellectual community transferring these ideologies onto other people? I guess was there economic purpose? Did they try to overcome class distinctions too as well, or did it start from not the nobility class, but of the working class?
So
Rise up. Was it a movement or was it a political party?
it's a great question. It was a movement because they dubbed themselves as association, and then but a political movement as well. And those people who established this foundation or association, and every single association at that time also had its official magazine and journal, let's say. So and these were very, very eminent intellectuals, and many of them had PhD, in France, and they were very much francophone as well, even though they maintained the idea of race from the German type of nationalism. But the founding figures came from Russia. They were Pan-Slav. They were subject to Pan-Slavic pressures, and they run away. But they were well-educated, intellectuals, and they created this ideology because they regard this ideology as, one of the solutions to solve the problems of the empire by creating this idea of Turkish nation. Of course, they had a not mass support, let's say, to a great extent, but still they were addressing to certain society within the Ottoman Empire, basically the nationalists, like the Turkish people, Turks, Ottoman Turks.
There are 5 different classifications, right? There are 5 different categories.
They usually define Turkishness on the basis of religion as well.
Right.
Yeah, Islam.
Oh.
So basically. But they didn't want to put much emphasis on Islam because their understanding of nationalism was quite secular as well.
So
After
it's a little bit hard to wrap my mind around what they use to identify the Turkish race, because when you look back to the Ottoman Empire, all those who were in charge, they actually were mixed with Russians and a bunch of other people. So I know you used and said that they used nationalism and ethnicity and kind of defined as the pure Turkish blood. At least back in World War II, the Nazis used, the blonde hair and the blue eyes to kind of identify who it could be part of the Aryanhood. What did the Turkish people really use when they themselves were mixed with non-Turkish blood?
So, actually, they were aware of all these historical facts. That's why they were always creating ideal situation, idealizing, So, like, great Turan race, like Pan-Turanism, like Pan-Islamism. They were all they were trying to create the mefkure, the ideal situation, and defining all parameters of Turkish nationalism on the basis of this ideal. But it was construction. So the point is to construct that identity and get the people around it, surround it. And that's why they had such a difficulty to define the race from a biological or anthropological perspective. That's why they use the words race, nation, lineage, descent interchangeably. This flexibility enables them actually to come up with any kind of definition as well. But the way they essentialize the Turkishness, the characteristic of being a Turk, is tantamount to cultural racism. We refer it in the literature here as cultural racism. So we are here, the definition of racism, we are trying to define it on the basis of cultural racism rather than relying on the biological racism, which was predominant during the Nazi period.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you say tribalism, tribe, race, nation, another word might be folk.
Yes.
And we know that the Nazis were influenced and idealized Ataturk and the Turks during the 1920s and 1930s. So listening to your lecture here in 1912 and 1914, it sounds a lot like early pre-Nazi folkish stuff. So the question here would be, what's the connection between German occult folkishness and Turks? I mean, there's obviously connections there, but which way does it go?
Especially aftermath of the established Turkish Republic, Ahmet Agayev and Yusuf Akço, these two leading figures, they were. Repeat. I can't repeat the question. So what's
want me to try it again?
So what's the relation between this Volkish.
Yeah, folkish,
Uh-huh.
German ideology of the
Like precursors of
1910s.
Nazi.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it almost sounds like
Yeah.
the Turks are ahead of the Germans in virtually everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an argument to be made that
Yeah.
Turkey really is the fulcrum of the 20th century because it was so influential on Germany.
If you look at the book authored by Stefan Ivry,
Yeah, I
close
read
friend
that.
of mine,
Yes,
colleague.
it's fine.
So he talks about this, affinities, these interactions. Even the Nazis came to power, actually, before Nazis came into power, and also, a number of Nazi intellectuals, Akçaroğlu, Ageyev, they had correspondence, and they talk about these kind of notions. If by Volkish, if you refer to ethnic nationalism, there are, similar patterns, that's for sure. This idea of folk, the search for roots and folkishness, and also all the cultural elements, even shamanistic kind of elements, you ascribe to this idea of folkishness, and the idea of Gemeinschaft, but way beyond Gemeinschaft, actually, this community with a certain novelty, certain, pure blood kind of understanding. It had ingrained in the mindset of these intellectuals as well, but they were not predominant. Let me put this way. But yes, there were similarities.
Were these people in communication with
German nationalist intellectual, let's say, who joined the Nazi party afterwards and also created the ideology of the Nazis as well. Yeah.
Question.
Please.
The Russians who came to Turkey and promoted this nationalism, did they have any Turkish descendants or were they just Russian?
They were not Russians. They were Kazakh, they were Eastern Turks, Tatar. They were Tatar. So actually they were real Turks, let's say, ethnically speaking. So, but they were born and raised in Russia, and their mother tongue was Russian, and they spoke Russian so eloquently, actually. But they were also this well education, and also came from the bourgeois families, and they started this awakening of national consciousness, national identity. They also realized that they had Turkish roots and they want to develop on it. And there was Slavization and Russification policy led by the Tsar at that time, So then they were against us. They were dissidents and they ran away. These people, even their family members were members of Duma in 1905 in the Tsarist Russia.
Umit, apparently, reading from the media that the current Turkish leadership the past several years is carrying on this ideology and fever and pace, apparently, of nationalism. And you read in the media these mixed signals, these threats of confiscation of villages or institutions. Then the next day we see in the media or on YouTube or on Facebook that, for example, 2 weeks ago, the mayor of Istanbul paying a courtesy, a very warm visit to the Patriarchate, meeting with Bishop Marashlian. So you get mixed signals. One day they're making an official visit, very warm relations, exchanging gifts. Then Erdogan or somebody else are making threats. And it seems like the philosophy or the ideology of nationalism is alive and well, especially by the government. Is that correct, or is that an incorrect impression?
I mean, I can only say one thing. I don't want to get into Turkish current political affairs, actually, but I can only say one thing. Nationalism is a childish sickness of Turkey. It's a childish sickness. It's a pathology. So that's why we actually all this, suppression, repression, politically speaking, and also the difficulties, hardships of democracy to emerge in Turkey, the Kurdish question, and all these problems have to do with the history, the past, and also not reckoning or coming to terms with the past, like not acknowledging Armenian genocide also as well. So Turkish nationalism as an ideology play a role in the massacres and deportation of Armenians in 1915 and 16. That's an historical fact. But this Turkish nationalism ingrained with the idea of pride, being a Turk is a pride and honor. So, and that's why it's a surpassing, long-lasting, and eternal idea, not only ideology, and it's an immature, childish sickness, and so hard to overcome.
Yeah, but they're getting away with it. The world is doing nothing today, like the Kurds now in Syria, and the thing is continuing. The genocide Armenian is continuing now. The Kurds.
Yeah,
and so far it's not.
that's true. That's true. So it's all this nationalistic tendencies. So you can, if you, for instance, as a politician, for instance, Erdogan before, so he worked with Kurdish political party, he started peace process, and then all of a sudden he just turned over the desk, and because he lost, votes, and he decided to change his mind, and he decided to turn back to nationalism and play nationalist cards, and he got back the votes. It always works.
Yeah.
So if you combine nationalism with little bit spicy religious, kind of also discourse, then you just win in Turkey. That indicates how, this Turkish nationalism is so strong, so robust, in people's minds. So you can get support, you can incite people. So yeah, that's it. It's an official defining ideology of Turkish nation. Thank you.
Thank you. We encourage you all to continue this discussion outside whether some refreshments, and also to make sure that you're on our mailing list. Thank you.